incidents or delays to report on I-57 or the Bishop Ford Freeway. Tollway traffic moves nicely. Northwest Indiana is okay. You may start to see some congestion now this morning around hospitals and health testing facilities. There are again hundreds of flight cancellations. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Worried about basement flooding? It's time to call Permaseal, 800-421-SEAL. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Here's our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Times of sun and clouds today, the high 56. Cloudy, mild, occasional rain and drizzle late tonight, low 46. Cloudy with some rain in the afternoon tomorrow, the high 51. And then periods of rain for the day Friday, the high 51. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Sunny and 35 at O'Hare. Next news, 8:30. Breaking news as it happens. And Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas Coffee, roasted fresh daily in Batavia, Illinois.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And before we get to our friend from First Things, Rusty Reno, a couple calls in response to our conversation last hour with Steve Moore on the aid package and the prospect of starting to return to work and normalcy. Greg in Schaumburg, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Thanks, Dan. To answer Steve Moore's question, how are you going to get people back to work when they're getting paychecks, is this. It's a Larry Kudlow answer. That before all of this happened, we were at maximum capacity in this country. We had the best employment picture ever. We had one of the best, if not the best, economies ever. So the way the graph should be on the Drudge Report is not a depression picture. It should be a huge wave that suddenly is lower, that in about 3 to 4 weeks or 5 weeks is going to return to that wave, and thus on Election Day, save the tape, 35,000 Dow, and Trump is going to be able to look at this entire country and say this would not have happened if you would have had a Democrat in office, and it would not have happened if you had a standard Republican either, only me, and he's dead right.
Yeah, but I'm not clear on why people are going to go back to work earlier than 4 months if they're getting full salary through unemployment for 4 months.
Because the overtime is going to be enormous. And frankly, men and women can't exist in the same house for that period of time and not get along each other.
Greg's onto something.
All
They're going to
right,
want to
thanks,
get
Greg.
back to work. People can barely breathe in their houses right now.
Okay.
They're walking imaginary dogs.
Scott on the west side.
Oh, hi, Scott.
Hey, Dan and Amy, thanks for taking my call. Steve Moore also brought up a thing that I've been saying since the very beginning of this shutdown is what in the Illinois state constitution gives J.B. Pritzker the right to shut down the entire state. I don't believe that he has that right, and I also am amazed at how everybody seems to be going along with it. I haven't heard much protest from anybody regarding it.
No, thanks for the call, Scott. He does. Now I'm trying to recall from memory.
What?
He does have. The governor has emergency powers. I think they extend for 30 days, and then you would need legislative action. I have to go back and check my Illinois Constitution, but there is a provision that confers emergency powers, just as there's an animating statute that confers emergency powers to the president. All right, switching gears, Rusty Reno has penned a couple of provocative thought pieces over the last few days, which is what he does, and which is why we have him on the show. Rusty Reno, editor at First Things. His latest piece.
Great to be with you.
Good to have you, Rusty. Thanks for joining us again. Your latest piece, Say No to Death's Definition. Let's start with the clergy, because this has been not a topic that's been discussed a lot, but we've kicked it around here a little bit, and there's a lot of people who feel the same way that you do, which is the clergy's abdication in this time, their sort of preemptive agreement with the state about shutting down. is a bit troubling.
Yes, it is pretty demoralizing when liquor stores and marijuana dispensaries are considered essential services, but worship is not. I mean, that is very demoralizing, I think, for us. It's a demoralizing insight into what our society really values. And then the lack of really strong pushback from our religious leaders is also demoralizing.
Yeah, and what does that say about the state of, I'll just talk about my own church, the Catholic Church, for example. I haven't heard anything from Cardinal Supich in Chicago. I haven't heard much on the topic of these shutdowns from Pope Francis or the role of clergy in a time of crisis like this. And you point out it was very different in places like, Germany during World War II when they were being bombed and kids were still going to school and clerics were still practicing the faith.
Yeah, and visiting the sick, and consoling those in need.
For the very reason of maintaining some, human interaction, to borrow from C.S. Lewis, doing human things during troubled times.
Yes. I mean, obviously, the preventing or trying to slow the spread of infection, it necessarily puts limits on what the church can and should do. But I think the pivot from kind of business as usual to kind of a complete shutdown has been a mistake. There's a diocese outside of Madrid that has continued to administer communion. I think, prudent measures can be taken to do the basic functions of the church in a way that's not irresponsible. And here in New York, some churches are locked. I mean, they're just literally not open. But other churches are open during the business day, and you can go in and pray before the Blessed Sacrament. The Holy Father has encouraged a pilgrimage. So he actually, I think, has been good on this. He pushed back against the shutting down of churches in Rome and said you shouldn't be closing the churches, even if the church suspends public celebration of the Eucharist.
Right. Even if we exercise social distancing, you can have, a good amount. I know in our church, we can have a good amount of people praying, and we could still be 10 to 12 feet apart from each other.
Yes. Or, Stations of the Cross during Lent, and the pastor obviously would have to limit the group, and people would have to exercise discipline, not socialize in the normal way. But I think it could be a powerful spiritual moment if the clergy were to experiment with ways to exercise their leadership. Because, we're basically in a time when the constant drumbeat, you read the newspaper, you listen to the radio, you watch TV, everybody is reporting on who's dying and the threat of death. And this is a time when we really need the word of the gospel that says that we're not made for death and that in Christ we have eternal life.
Which
segue, people need to hear that word, especially now. And so even if we're not celebrating the Eucharist, even if there's no distribution of the elements in the church, but there should be some public teaching of the church in this time. The church's voice needs to be heard in a time when death is on everybody's mind.
And that segues into another argument that you tackled. I tackled it from a secular perspective, the idea there's no such thing as overreaction. You tackled more specifically the argument made by politicians that everything we're doing is to save life at any cost, and saving life at any cost is beyond reproach, that disposition. And you suggest not only is it sentimental babble, it's dangerous.
Yes, I think it's demonic. I mean, at any cost, saving life at any cost. If we were Aztecs and we thought we could sacrifice 1,000 people in Times Square and that would put an end to the pandemic, we should do that. I mean, obviously, justice should never be sacrificed to saving life. I don't think beauty should be sacrificed to saving life. There are many things, and I mean, what makes us human is that we don't live just for the sake of our physical survival. We live for higher things, for family, for our community. And I think this question of justice is an important part of civic life. and obviously for our, the spiritual things. So I think it's very troubling to live in an environment where you cannot practice the corporal works of mercy. And, I think that the church should be more vocal about this. We need to be asking, how can we fight this disease without suspending the corporal works of mercy? To say nothing of the spiritual works of mercy.
How long do you think that this is going to go on?
I'm not a medical person, but I discount a number of my friends are kind of hoping that it'll somehow abate very soon, or that there'll be some sort of technological fix, a vaccine, or some sort of treatment course. But I have no idea. I mean, history suggests with viral infections like this is that they come in waves. So it will abate with warm weather and then come back again when the cold weather comes in the fall. The Spanish flu had 3 discrete waves over the course of 18 months.
I want to go to this piece by Brendan O'Neill at Spiked about the luxury of apocalypticism. And
I thought that was a great piece.
It's an unbelievable piece, and I want you to comment specifically on what he said about the misanthropic elites. The practical challenge posed by this new sickness has been collapsed into the elite's pre-existing culture of misanthropic dread. He notes some headlines from like the Washington Post. Coronavirus is an indictment of our way of life. And he said, here we cut to the heart of the apocalyptic mindset of the modern elite. Their dread over natural calamities or novel new illnesses is not driven by the actual facts about these things, far less by the desire to overcome them through the deployment of human expertise and scientific discovery. Rather, it speaks to their pre-existing moral disorientation, their deep loss of faith in the human project itself. It is their downbeat cultural convictions that draws them to apocalypticism as surely as light draws in moths.
I think this is a factor. I mean, obviously there are people who are, public health officials and doctors who are throwing themselves into this battle in a very noble way. But I agree. I was walking my dog yesterday, and these 2 women were talking. I could overhear them, and the woman said, "Well, we deserve it. We're destroying the planet." I thought, wow. I mean, that's a kind of, that's exactly what he was speaking about. This sort of, even kind of relishing the prospect of destruction. I do think that after in a post-Christian culture, you actually have all this guilt running around with no place to go, and people, especially elites, actually relish the idea that our modern society is destroying the planet and the climate catastrophe is coming and we're going to get punished.
Another way of describing this borrows from Susan Sontag, actually, of all people, the idea that we're growing stupid together. And this is illustrated in, for example, the reaction to the terminology used to describe the virus, whether or not using Chinese or Wuhan virus or what have you is racist, and the D.C. Press Corps' obsession with that, and the left's obsession because the D.C. Press Corps is obsessed, and this concentric circle around the whole public health and economic health crisis.
It's a sign of how frivolous our politics have become, isn't it?
Mm.
People, I mean, we're crashing our economy in a way that is unprecedented historically. There's never been a state-mandated economic depression, and that's what we're entering into. So who knows where that's going to lead? And then, of course, there is the suffering of people who are ill and those who have died. And we have a press corps that's worried about whether we call it the Wuhan virus or the whatever they want to call it, the XYZ virus or something like that, something innocuous. It is a sign of how frivolous. And I do think we are being buffaloed into a radical response to this threat by our elite that doesn't believe in anything greater than physical survival. And it's turning our society, at least for a temporary period, into a very Hobbesian environment, which I resent. And I think we need to remember this when it's all said and done. We have to pick up the wreckage. Who was screaming that we had to do all this?
Yeah, and I like your formulation.
They need to be held accountable.
And I like your formulation on economics, too. It used to be the government wrecked the economy accidentally. Now we're in the phase where they're doing it on purpose. That is.
Yes, I agree. And we don't know where that's going to lead. I mean, we have no historical precedent for that. I'm hopeful. I mean, I try to be hopeful, but who knows? Nobody knows where this is going to take us. And, I hope that President Trump, can strong arm some of these governors. I don't just worry about the economic. I also worry about the social. I mean, how many vulnerable parochial schools are going to survive this? How many city orchestras that already have stretched budgets? How many other nonprofits and civic organizations are going to wind up being swept away in the economic storm that's coming? And so I worry about that, and also I worry about spiritual consequences of this shutdown. How many people are going to go back to church? You get used to it, and you get into a habit. And now they're telling us. Pardon?
I said I'm going to go back
too.
Yeah.
But, so I worry about the political implications. I think when it's all said and done, the government's going to own a great deal of the economy, and so the workout is going to make us look like post-Soviet Russia. Which is not a pretty sight of log rolling and people who have contacts getting the best deals and all that sort of thing. So I think there's political, social, and spiritual consequences here that just have not been adequately measured. A lot of talk about the economic consequences in terms of working people who aren't going to be able to make rent. I think that's hugely important, but there's also the political, social, and spiritual. Man cannot live on bread alone. And when we try to do that for a season, we do a great deal of damage. Even if it's temporary, we do damage to our humanity.
He is Rusty Reno. He's the editor at firstthings.com. Check out his latest piece, which I tweeted out, Say No to Death's Dominion. Rusty, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me on the show, Dan and Amy.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of nature. Changing the world, one life at a time.
I look at Balance of Nature and I look what it's doing for me and for the patients that I have that are taking it. And it's been phenomenal watching the changes that have happened and how much healthier and how much more energy they have. If we give you the proper nutrients, your body's able to produce what it needs. And here's a product from Balance of Nature that basically makes it so you get the nutrient equivalent of eating 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. The thing that amazes me with it is that it's so simple.
Don't wait to see what getting over 10 servings of whole fruits and vegetables every day can do for you. Right now, Balance of Nature is offering free shipping and 35% off on any new preferred order of fruits